All right, so as we get our project started, we want to make sure that we have all of the appropriate supplies. So the supplies are listed in the pattern, and I've also included them in the video as well. So we'll just briefly go through those and just make sure you have everything available before you start your project. So first you'll need the pattern, of course, which you can get at FletcherPatternCompany.com. Today we're going to be making the dress form for an 11-inch Leeann doll. So I think she's a super cute doll. She's got a pretty easy shape to work with. It's much less complicated than the dress form for the fashion doll, so I think you'll find that to be a little bit more pleasant. Then we have our fabric that we've chosen. You could probably do it with a fat quarter or less. I like to use a cotton with a little bit of a printable on it. That gives it a little bit more weight. That's just an option. I recommend a medium weight, something that's not very translucent that you can't see through, so it maintains the shape of the dress form. The next thing you're going to need is a base. You can get these at Hobby Lobby or on Amazon. I generally, the smallest one that I've been able to find is by a 4x4 circle, or this is a 3x5 round. Then you'll need a drawer pull, and this has a 1/4 inch opening at the top, a piece of medium weight cardboard, and you'll notice this is not corrugated. This is a flat piece of cardboard, a scrap of foam core, pencil. This is a 1/4 inch dowel, and it's been cut to 10 inches for the Leeann doll. You'll need a little bit of a remnant of some felt, and that needs to be enough that when you roll it around the dowel, it comes out to 2 3/4 inch, which is the same as her actual neck. In addition to that, you're going to need some Elmer's glue, you're going to need an x-acto knife, a pair of scissors, and then a measuring tape. You're going to want to measure the doll form as you're making it to make sure that it's actually coming out the shape of the doll. So with those supplies in mind, we'll go ahead and get started with the next step. Okay, now we have all of our pieces cut out. So basically what we have here is the actual fabric of the dress form, as well as the base cover and the neck, and these are the armhole covers. In addition to the fabric dress form, we also have the base cover, and then also the armhole covers. So the next step before we actually start sewing is to go ahead and prepare a portion of the actual post. Now you'll notice that with this small drawer pull that's on the top, it's actually a 1/2 inch insertion point there. So you want to make sure you know where that is. And I would recommend just going ahead and marking it with a pencil, because you want the neck of the dress form to actually start at the base instead of creating a problem when you're trying to put the cap on. So we have our 1/2 inch mark right here. We're going to take our felt remnant, which is cut as a 1/2 inch by 6 inches, which tends to roll out to about 2 3/4 inches, which is the neck circumference of the Leeann doll. So we're just going to get a little bit of our glue and just go ahead and start to roll below that 1/2 inch line this actual fabric. So you can see here. And the way you're going to do that is just kind of pinch it as you go and then overlap it. Now you don't want to pull it too tight, because you actually do want it to measure out to that 2 3/4 inches. So you want to keep your measuring tape close by also. And we want this to dry while we're sewing the dress form, so that we can continue construction after we get a few of our seams in. So continue rolling that all the way around, and when you're actually to the end, you're just going to use a needle and thread and take a few stitches to cast off the neck, and then we're going to set that to the side and let it dry. Once you have it rolled on there, you can go ahead and measure it to make sure that it's about the right circumference for Leeann's neck. And I recommend one of these very small measuring tapes. It's just a more accurate measure. And as you can see, it's right at about the right length there. So that's perfect. Now I'm just going to take that needle and thread and cast off a few stitches just to hold it in place while the glue dries. All right, for the next step, we're going to just set that to the side. You can check the dowel on the top to make sure so you can see how it's going to finish. Set that to the side. And then you're going to take the cardboard base cover. So this is actually going to be at the bottom of the dress form, and you want to cover it with fabric to give it a nice finish. So this is the piece that we're going to use for that. What you want to do is just clip in towards the line indicated on the pattern. You can take some little triangular cuts just to make sure that you can wrap it around the base evenly and easily. Again, once you have that done, all you're going to do is take your base, add a little bit of glue to it, and it's really right along the edges that you need it on the back, and then all across the front to smooth that out. Make sure you have your fabric with the wrong side up, and just set the base cover to the middle. Now you're just going to tuck those cut edges in towards the edge until you have it completely attached all the way around, and then you're just going to set that to the side, and then we can actually start the fun part, which I think is the sewing part. All right, so now we begin the fun part, the actual sewing of the dress form. So we're going to quickly look at our pieces, which are the center front, the side side back, the actual back piece, the neck, and then the armhole cover. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to take our scissors and we're going to clip in towards all the curved edges. Now you want this to be a pretty small clip. The seam allowance on the dress form is 1/4 inch, so that clip should be about 1/8 of an inch. And you just want to do that so that you can make a nice even seam up each side and just easing those curves as you sew. So what we're going to start with is the front and the side front sections, but first I'm going to go ahead and do that clipping, and then we'll take it over for our first seams. When you're sewing the dress form, I think it's really important that you start all of your seams at the actual hem edge. That's going to make sure that everything ends up correctly at the top. So I'm going to just place it with right sides together, and I'm going to sew the side front sections to the center front section. Feel free to lift your sewing foot up and make that curve 1 stitch at a time if needed. It's better to take time and do it carefully than it is to go quickly and make the seam allowance the wrong size. So my stitch length is set at a 2. I want it to be nice and tight because I don't want there to be any pulling of the seams as I stuff the dress form with the polyfill. Now that we have the front section of the dress form finished, we're going to go ahead and do that same thing using the side back to the back. One thing I didn't show you initially was that you do want to back stitch at the top and bottom of each of these seams because you want to reinforce it, and when you do put the polyfill in, you don't want the seams to pull open. So remember to start your stitch with a back stitch to secure and then go ahead and finish the seam. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and press those seams open, and then I'm gonna sew the front to the back at the shoulder seam. Now that we have the dress form front sewn to the dress form back sections at the shoulder seam, we're going to sew it together at the side seams. All right, so now we're in pretty good shape. What we want to do now is, if you have an opportunity to try it onto the doll, it should fit literally like a second skin. So we're going to get our Leeann doll and see how we're doing on the construction so far. All right, so here's our Leeann doll. She's super cute. She's made by Baste out of Canada, and he has a really cute line of small dolls if you're interested and aren't familiar with him, although I can't imagine that you're not. So let's go ahead and slip on our dress form and see how the construction is going so far. It's at this point that you could create a little bit tighter dress form if it's too loose, if your seams were too small, but hopefully it's going to fit pretty well, so we won't have to worry about that. So like I said, it should fit literally like a dress, almost a second skin. Now I think it does seem just a hair bit loose, so I'm going to take it in a little bit at the side seam. So when you flip it over, you have to remember you're going to sew that back seam, so it should be even from the top to the bottom with the same amount of fold over. So again, I think if I take a little bit of the side seam in, then it'll be a little bit closer, and I'll make that adjustment on the pattern as well. And I think our progress is going pretty good so far. All right, now that we have the front and the back sewn together at the shoulder seams, it's time to do the armholes. Of all the steps in the dress form, the armholes are the most challenging, but once you do it a couple of times, it seems pretty easy. I'm using a mini iron, which I recommend if you have one. Just be really careful. These get so hot. I've burned more things with this iron by not paying attention to where I set it than you can imagine. So with that being said, we have our armhole covers right here. These are the little cardboard insets that are going to go to the inside of the garment before we stuff it. So what I want to do is try to create as best I can that circle so that I know how to hand stitch it into the armhole opening. So I'm going to take a bunch of little tiny clips, and in this case a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch, all the way around the armhole, because I want to hand stitch that armhole covering in place. Once I have those clips in place, what I'll go ahead and do is I'm going to take my mini iron and I'm going to take the little cardboard piece and I'm going to put it in the center and then just try to create that circle right here. It helps if you put a little bit of water on the piece. So I'm going to give it a little squirt just to make it wet. And then just be really careful that you don't burn yourself. I'm going to just go ahead and pick this up and push it in towards the center. I want a really clear line of where the armhole is supposed to sew into the armhole edge. Once you have your armhole covers pressed so that you can sort of get that initial shape, you're going to go ahead and take it to the armhole edge and also press that back. I like to use a sewing ham for this. It just makes it easier to get into the circle. And all I'm going to do is just put it over the end and create that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And again, I'm going to use that mini iron just to make sure I can press that seam back. So it takes a little bit of time, but since this is the most challenging portion of the whole garment construction, I think it's worth it just to give yourself a little bit extra time to create a nice circular opening so that then you can go ahead and hand stitch that armhole covering into the armhole edge. All right, that looks pretty decent. So now I'm going to just get my needle and thread and I'm going to sew the covers into the dress form. Once you have the armhole covering basted in place, you can go ahead and top stitch around the circle, or you can go ahead and hand finish it. And this is just to secure that seam since you just basted in. So take really small stitches if you're doing it by hand, and this is just, again, to reinforce that armhole edge. All right, for the next step, now that we have the worst behind us, we're going to go ahead and take the cardboard inset and just glue it to the inside of that armhole covering. That's just going to give it a little bit more stability and a little bit better shape when you actually have the full dress form put together. So we're just going to add not too much glue, but just enough to stick it in that hole, and then we're going to allow it a little bit of time to dry. So just make sure you smear it on pretty good with your finger, and then you're going to just place it right in that hole. Should follow right on your outline. And then just check to the front and sort of work that piece of cardboard right into where your stitch length is. All right, great. So we're making super good progress, and the very next step is going to be to go ahead and add the neck portion. So what I did is just press a little mark into the center of that so I can match it to the center of the front. I'm going to pin it with right sides together, and then I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew the neck to the actual dress form. So let's do that now. Just check that seam and make sure you don't have any unusual tucks or puckers as usual, and everything looks to be pretty good. So from there, the very next step is going to be to go ahead and sew the center back seam. So let's do that, and we're actually getting really close to finishing, so this is great. Now, before I actually did that center back seam, I already turned the lower edge of the dress form up 1/4 inch and hard pressed it. That's just a reference that I'm going to use later when I slip the base up and know how far to fill on the dress form. So now what I'm going to do is just clip into the seam allowance a little bit, take it over to the ironing board and press that back seam open, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, now that we have the back seam pressed, what we need to do is turn the dress form right side out, and then we're going to actually put the neck post in. So here's how it's shaping up so far. Now, before we got started, we already did this. We attached that remnant of felt to the actual dowel. This should be pretty dry now, so we wanted to make sure we got it pretty secure with the glue and then finished it with that stitching. We're just gonna press it up into the body of the doll and work our way into the neck. But we wanna make sure you don't unlayer it. So here's how it's gonna look, just like that. Now, it should feel, you know, snug, but not super tight, which is good. You can always add a little bit of polyfill if you feel like it's a little bit loose around there. So once I get it in position, I want the material to be 1/4 inch from the beginning. And then we're gonna just fold the material in, and we're gonna go ahead and glue that to the felt. One thing that can help is if you just cut a little paper washer, the same diameter as the bottom of the dowel, and just push that down onto the felt to give it something to adhere the glue to. So we're gonna do that. Once you have that material stuck onto the felt, all you're going to do is just slip the drawer pull over it and then tuck the ends of the fabric inside. Once you have it pretty good, what you want to do is just go ahead and let that set, because if you start to stuff the dress form with that neck still being wet, it will actually pull away from the top of the dowel. So you want to let that dry for a few minutes, maybe even half an hour, and then come back and get your polyfill, and you'll get ready to almost be finished and start with the stuffing of the dress form. All right, so originally when I started the video, I thought we would use this base for our doll stand, but I had to run to Hobby Lobby to get some small 1/4 inch spools to put the base onto here, and I think it looks a little bit too big. So I found some different items there that I thought would be fun. So since Leeann's only an 11-inch doll, this might be an appropriate base for her. And then there was some other little facets, so we can build kind of a decorative stand. And what we're going to do then is just put the stick down into there, and that's going to hold her. So you really have a lot of options with the base, but I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I got a new glue gun. I'm going to glue these couple of pieces together, and then we're going to resume the project by stuffing the dress form with polyfill. So let's glue the base, and then we'll get to the filling next. So that actually looks pretty cute. And if you wanted to, when you finish the project or even before you do it, you could always go ahead and paint these raw wood materials into a different color. And so here's how it's going to kind of work out when we get done with filling the dress form. So let's take it to the polyfill section now. All right, so the product that we're using is just called Polyfill. It's 100% pure polyester fiber. This is actually a giant bag. Obviously, won't need that much for the project. So I'm just gonna take some out, put it to the side, and then we will get to stuffing this dress form. So the first thing you wanna do is you wanna kind of roll it up, because you wanna stuff it to the neck. And we've let that dry, so everything should be nice and secure. And then I'm just going to take it and put it equally from front and to back. So I'm just going to kind of go in front of the post and then behind. And now Leeann's just a little doll, a little child doll, so she doesn't have a lot of chest or curvy hips to worry about. So we are really just trying to get an even fill front and back, and then we'll make sure. So just kind of take your time and fill out those armholes as well. Now you want to have your measuring tape close by, because you are going to want to measure this as well once you start getting it to where you think it's full enough. So just work with it a little bit. You want to fill the form pretty tightly. That way, if you want to use it to drape fabric, you can push the pins into it and it should hold its shape pretty well. All right, now that we're getting pretty close to having it full, we want to refer back to our Leeann doll. And so here she is. Now, as you can see, she's pretty thin all the way around, and she does have a little bit of a bum. But if you look at her from a side profile, she's relatively flat. So we're trying to go for that exact same shape. So I might want to add a little bit of filling to the back and just see how we go from there. All right, I think it's coming together pretty good. What I'm going to do is get my measuring tape and check the measurements and see how I am as far as bust, waist, and hips for the doll measurements. All right, once you get the doll form stuffed to just about where you want it to be, you're going to go ahead and get these last two pieces. So this is the actual base cover, which we covered with the fabric, that piece of cardboard. And this is the actual foam core board we cut out. This is the base you put on first. So you're just going to slide it up the post, and then you're going to take the fabric at the end of the base, at the end of the dress form, and just try to pull it around the outside of the foam core. And once you have it positioned as you like it, you're just going to glue it in place with your hot glue gun. A little bit from the edge, because you don't want to catch the edge of the fabric with the glue, because you're actually going to sew the base to the actual fabric of the dress form. All right, once you have the glue attached to the actual foam core base, you're just going to take the base cover and you're going to slide it up onto the dress form. Now you can glue this together with hot glue as well, but I would recommend that you do it really close to the inside near the foam core so that you can stitch this fabric to the fabric covering on here. So I'm just going to add just a thin layer of glue around the base, trying not to get it too close to the edge. And then I'm just going to slip my cover on up to it, centering it front and back. All right, and we're almost finished. So the next step is going to be just a hand cast right over the edge of the fabric to meet it right to this base. And that's going to give it a nice finished look. And then we'll get a few pictures and see how it turned out. So much better. All right, so that really adds a nice finishing touch, and you can kind of squish it around to try to make sure that the form is exactly as you want it to be. So let's go ahead and get our base, get a few pictures, and see how we think our whole project turned out. Great job. So we're actually finished. Here we have Leeann standing next to her new fabric dress form. Leeann and more information about her can be found at Affordable Designs, and I'll leave a link to that website in the description below. Thank you for watching. Please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.